living longer, living healthier, living better than ever before. Welcome to Mountain Pacific's Healthy Living for Life, a weekly series that gives you the information, education, and expert insight you need to become an active participant in today's ever-changing healthcare climate. Here now is today's program host.
The COVID-19 pandemic forced many of us to physically isolate ourselves. While some of us turned to technology to stay connected to the outside world, others didn't know where to turn, feeling disconnected, alone, and helpless. So where do you go to find meaning, value, or even joy? Welcome to Healthy Living for Life, a show dedicated to helping you do just that. I'm your host, Beth Brown. Today we're going to talk about how to find meaning in life, even during a pandemic. Stay with us. Welcome back to Healthy Living for Life. Joining me first today is Carolyn Dalamole, who is the co-owner of the Silver Post and also a social advocate for aging populations. So thanks so much for being here with us today, Carolyn.
It's nice to be here with you.
We appreciate your time. So let's start out by talking about life after work and how that can look for some retirees who struggle with their identity when they're no longer working. Can you explain to us the term the third act and what that might look like for retirees?
Absolutely. So the third act is a term that is used pretty broadly to describe the third stage of life, and other stages might be childhood, working adult, and then retired adult. But it can be helpful to kind of summarize these life stages because things change as we age and experience new things. In terms of what it looks like, though, it really can look like anything. Our experience at every stage of life is very diverse from those around us. And, my working career might look different from yours that you have had. And similarly, when we retire, our retirement third act stage will very likely look different. In the past, we've had a very simple narrative about what that can look like. And in general, the narrative has been life slows down. But actually, there's a shift happening where generations right now are looking at retirement as maybe a way to reinvent themselves or take up a new hobby, maybe explore their creativity. And that narrative about what it looks like in your third act is shifting because opportunities are opening up that weren't previously considered.
So maybe the third act isn't as challenging as it used to be, or retirement, if people are finding ways to redefine themselves. But what kind of challenge did this pandemic put on that third act?
The pandemic has absolutely been a challenge for all of us in those diverse ways. For those in the third act, it's extra layers of change and unexpected change. So sometimes when the third act or that retirement phase of life doesn't feel as vibrant for some, or they're getting into it and trying to catch their stride, it's mostly because of the change. Any change in life can have the ability to create concern or fear, even anger or resentment about the stage or your experiences. But the pandemic has added another layer because challenges and change are even more difficult when it's different than what we expected. So if we have a vision of our retirement and we have a vision of what it'll be like to grow old, and those phases of life can be so beautiful in our dreams, and then when it comes to our reality or a pandemic hits, our expectation is very different from what is happening around us. And the distance between our expectation and the reality can create more of those struggling feelings that we would like to avoid. So it's also kind of stripped us from a lot of our basic wants and needs, a sense of safety, definitely a connection to others, which can already be pretty challenging in retirement.
That is so true. And so part of what you do in your work is you try to bridge the gap between different generations. Why is that important to connect people from different generations?
Happiness. There are many reasons that connecting generations is beneficial to an individual, society at large. But really in my work, we see all the time that happiness is the core of what that connection can bring to both parties too, right? So my peers connecting with the generations above them is a new thing that we are actually also seeing a shift in. But when we connect to other generations, we're connecting to a piece of ourselves, our future self, our history. And so with that connection comes a lot of joy and happiness. For those who might feel disconnected, there can be some nerves or guilt or even sadness about that disconnect. But when you decide to reach out and to connect, we see at the Silver Post all the time that there tends to be kind of that release or letting go of maybe a guilt that a person might have about a disconnect. And taking the smallest step is really, really impactful at creating that connection where it may not have been. If your connections are strong, creating more connections can also create that more happiness. So it's a big focus of ours at the Silver Post.
That is very cool. So do you have some advice for retirees who might not be able to take advantage of your services, for example? What can they do to feel connected?
Absolutely. My biggest piece of advice is to imagine what might be ideal. So sometimes we think, oh, I feel disconnected. I'm very aware of that. I challenge the person that might be listening or a friend of someone who's listening to think about what would be ideal. What do I wish for? And then secondly, to just ask for one piece of that. Ask a relative to maybe call you on Sunday or write a letter to someone in your family just to reach out and say hi and ask for a letter back. The small gestures are what help change that feeling of disconnect. So trying a couple of things can get the ball rolling and also create a reciprocal coming back to you of more connection.
Those are some great tips. We are actually almost out of time in about 30 seconds that we have left. Any final thoughts you want to make sure folks hear today?
I would like people to just think about what in their daily life could maybe create more connection to a loved one. So if you're on your phone a lot, how could you use your phone to better connect to a loved one? How could you create more happiness for those that you truly care about? Now that we're starting to learn from that pandemic and what disconnect felt like, let's make sure we don't have to go back there and instead can create habits, routines that fit our day, but also create meaningful connection.
That's great. Carolyn, thank you so very much for being here today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we do need to take a break here, but when we come back, we're going to continue to talk about how to find meaning and to feel connected, even in tough times when it feels like it might be impossible. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. We've been talking about how the pandemic and other tough situations might make you feel isolated or alone. And now we're going to talk with Judy David, who is going to give us some advice on how we can still feel connected and find some meaning in life, even during difficult times. So Judy, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
It's our pleasure. So let's start by talking about what you do and why you're so passionate about what you do.
Sure. So visiting angels, for myself and my family, it's a purpose-driven opportunity for us. Serving people, not only our own parents, our own grandparents, but our veterans and the disabled in the community. It's really critical for us because, these people have fought in wars, they've raised families, they've built businesses, and they deserve all the dignity and respect in their later years that they did early on. So it's our pleasure to help them along their path.
That's so great. And COVID-19 has obviously created some challenges. Can you talk a little bit about what you've personally witnessed as far as trying to visit these folks and what you're seeing during the pandemic?
Sure. So many of our clients, we hear great stories, and many of them have been married for 50 years. But when something happens to their health, and with COVID, they've been separated now for the first time in their life. And that's just heartbreaking. So obviously people are feeling, isolated and they're fearful, but that fear is really stealing their joy and their hope. So anything that we can do to comfort them. And then, a lot of people are wondering, well, I'm isolating today, but will I have to isolate for the rest of my years? So we're just there to help them and to support them through this time.
So can you talk a little bit about what some of the support is that you provide? What are the services that you do? And how can people maybe tap into that kind of support if they don't have a service like yours in their area?
Sure. It can be challenging. We're socially distanced and then with, inclement weather. But what's important, I think, for everybody is to have a routine. Every day we look forward to something. We get up, we get out of bed, we know, Crystal's going to be here at 10 on Tuesday. I got to get ready, So it really does help to have something to look forward to. And, we get dressed and we bring the joy to our clients, day. So that's really important. It's really challenging, when holiday gatherings are canceled. Those traditions are things that we all look forward to. So staying engaged can continue to be a challenge, but just having a sense of belonging in other ways, whether we're encouraging our clients to make a phone call or I think you mentioned postcards earlier. That's something that we try to encourage. Any way that we can help people feel connected, that's what we're here for. That's
so great. Has there been something that especially surprised you during this pandemic when you've been trying to reach out to folks?
I guess how polarizing everything is lately. We have people from all different backgrounds and perspectives and their opinions on things, whether to mask or whether not to mask or whether to wear 2 masks. We really have a very broad spectrum of people and their experiences. So we're just trying to be very respectful and just keep some kindness in that dialogue. It's important.
Yeah, kindness is so huge. I agree. So what advice can you give us to figure out ways of how we can stay connected or find meaning even when we're going through tough times?
Well, just to remember that we're human and that as humans, we're really relationship based. So any way that we can continue to have connection with people in a time when we can't just give somebody a hug, maybe we could drop off a meal, or maybe, like we said, we could send a postcard, we could make a phone call. We could do something nice to let people know that they're important and that they're valued and that we care about them.
Before the break, we were talking with Carolyn about how sometimes retirees might lose their sense of self or not feel valued. Do you have some advice on to help people find value and feel valued?
Sometimes when we can't find purpose internally, what we can do is go out of our way to help somebody else. And then we feel valued because we made something simple like holding a door open for somebody can bring a smile to someone's face. And, just the little things that we can do, they can help. The more we can serve others, the more we can find value in our day. And I think that it's contagious when we do that.
So I think you've touched on this a little bit, but just to summarize some lessons learned that you have learned and can take forward for helping folks.
Personally, I've really learned how important relationships are, and that's our approach to our care is that we're relationship based. We're not transactional. We really want to develop trust and treat everybody like family. And especially early on in the pandemic, how important it is to have that connection and to work with people and how important family is. Before it was easy to put work first or to put other things first or to put things off. Now we understand a little bit more how precious those relationships are.
For sure. We have about 30 seconds left. Judy, any closing thoughts you want to leave us with?
Just to be positive. I know that there's a lot of scary things in the news sometimes, but just to stay active, stay focused, and stay positive, and just to be kind. Like I said, the little things that we do can make a world of difference. So, I think if we all do that, I think it really does make a difference.
That's great. Thank you, Judy, so much. Great tips.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your time.
Okay. Have a good day.
It is time to take another break, but when we come back, we're going to continue to talk about how to find meaning and how to actively pursue joy. We'll talk about that right after this. Stay with us. Welcome back. Sarah Elkins is joining us now, and she is the Chief Story Maker at Elkins Consulting and author and podcast host of Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. So thanks so much for being with us today, Sarah.
Thank you for the invitation. It's going to be so much fun.
Good. So our first, I just want to talk about the idea of seeking or finding joy, which might sound like something that people should be able to do fairly easily, but it's probably harder done than said. So can you just start by talking to us a little bit about what you do in this area?
Well, first of all, I'd love to acknowledge the distinction between seeking joy and seeking happiness, because I think that joy is in moments versus happiness is kind of the baseline of where you are. And if you already are generally a happy person, finding joy is much simpler. But if happiness isn't your baseline, then finding joy can be a little more challenging. So my work in this is I'm a storyteller and a storytelling coach and also a StrengthsFinder coach. So what I love to do is, I'll just give you an example. I was working with a coaching client that was struggling to find his own stories to speak about as an executive. And he knew that sharing a story would connect it better to his audience. And through our work of uncovering daily stories that happen, the daily interactions with his two daughters, with his wife, with any of his colleagues, the clients that he really enjoyed working with, we started uncovering these moments throughout the day that when he started looking for them because of his work with me, he started finding these joyful moments throughout his day. And that's what I love to do, is help people to be more present, more mindful, and that's all through the power of storytelling and story sharing.
That sounds really great. And you kind of distinguish between happiness and joy. So what is the definition of joy?
I do not have that written down. I wouldn't begin. But I think when we think about joy, we feel it more than we can define it. And I'll just give an example. Just yesterday, I was out in my yard here in Helena, Montana, and I saw the beginnings of tulip stems coming up through the ground. And that was a moment I felt my heart warm. I felt the warmth fill my body. I had a big smile on my face. And that's what I see as joy. And that is a very basic, it's not an epic moment, but that's, you know what I'm feeling just by describing the story.
So is that how you find joy? Just noticing little things like that? Or how do you go about finding joy?
Well, that is how I do it. And it's how I guide my clients to do that, to be more present. So I always like to remind people that joy is something that you seek. If you aren't a naturally joyful person, if you're not a naturally happy person, there was an article in the Elephant Journal many years ago that quoted Kurt Vonnegut. And the quote was, "Well, if that's not nice, I don't know what is." So I interviewed the journalist who wrote that viral article a couple of years ago on my podcast. And the context was that we easily remember bad things because they stimulate all the parts of our brain. But the good things, those little joyful moments like seeing the daffodils coming up for the first time in the spring and the crocuses and the tulips, those things we forget very quickly because they don't necessarily connect for us across different parts of our brain. So every time I see something that's particularly nice, like the tulips, or in this case, as soon as I read that article, I walked downstairs and I saw my older son, who was 18 at the time, laying on the floor in front of our fireplace. It was winter, with our giant chocolate lab. And he was just laying there enjoying this warmth in the moment with our dog. And I stood at the doorway, and I remember this moment because I did this. I stopped in the doorway, I took it in, I breathed it in, and I said out loud, "Well, if that's not nice, I don't know what is."
That's great. Can you talk about the relationship between joy and gratitude and why that matters?
Absolutely. I truly believe that we can only be joyful when we have gratitude, which means that we need to acknowledge when something happens that's good. We need to be grateful for it. And when we do that, that triggers our release of really good chemicals in our brain, like serotonin and oxytocin. So when you write a thank you note, the person who receives it gets a boost of oxytocin, which is, of course, the happy drug, the happy chemical that goes through our brain and reduces the release of cortisol, the stress chemical in our brain. So when you write that, you actually get a bigger boost of oxytocin than the person who receives your letter. And you both receive that boost of oxytocin, but writing it actually gives you a bigger boost than receiving it. So clearly that has a very direct relationship with joy. And one of the things I encourage people to do when I'm working with them to be more present, to uncover the important stories in their lives so that they can connect more effectively, is to think about very specific moments that you felt grateful, that maybe something you did was pivotal for somebody else, or something that somebody did for you changed your life in some small way that maybe longer term affected you more than you thought it did. So very specific examples of gratitude can trigger that release of oxytocin, which then, of course, automatically gives you a moment of happiness or joy, depending on how you're looking at it.
Okay, perfect. So the time flew by. We just have seconds left. Any final words that you want to leave us with today? I encourage you, if you're retired or if you are living alone, to really think about mindfulness and gratitude as a practice. Remember that your purpose isn't tied to your job. Your purpose is tied to your relationships. And when you build those relationships through genuine story sharing and story listening, I promise you'll find more moments of joy. Awesome. Sarah, thank you so much. That was great. My pleasure. Thanks, Beth. And I want to thank Judy and Carolyn as well again for being on our show today. And thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you'll come back and see us again next weekend. Until then, stay fit, stay well, and stay healthy for life with Healthy Living for Life. Have a great and joyful week, everybody.
Healthy Living for Life is brought to you by Mountain Pacific Quality Health in partnership with AARP Montana. We'd love to hear from you. If you have suggestions for future programs, visit our website at mpqhf.org or call us at 406-443-4020. You can also catch us on YouTube by visiting our website and clicking on the Healthy Living for Life logo. Production facilities provided by Video Express Productions.